Hey everyone, Ethys here with another lore tour. We're doing World of Darkness. I know I haven't done one of these in a little while, and I feel like every time I do one, I'm like making excuses for the fact that I haven't been doing them. The truth of it is that I'm always a little surprised when I get requests for a lore tour video, because let's face it, I'm absolutely atrocious at multitasking. And going off script and stuff like that doesn't feel super natural for me. I'm not like I'm not like Mr. Happy, who I swear has a separate brain just for his mouth. It's amazing. Happy, if you're watching this question for week 35 or whatever it is now, where do you keep that second brain and what do you feed it? But anyway, I have had some requests, particularly for this one, and all the Crystal Tower series have been super dense in terms of every enemy seems to have a story, and I think this one's no different, so that's what we're doing today. It's late enough now in the patch that we're probably not going to wipe. Might be jinxing it there. We're probably not going to wipe, and we should be able to keep this about 25 minutes, I reckon. If you haven't noticed already, I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that I do now have my Dreadworm Spear, which I'd be more excited about it if I didn't already have my Zeta, but it's super exciting, although it looks absolutely horrible. I can't believe that it's an upgrade from the High Elegant Spear, which looked much better. Anyway, we're straight into Garm. Now, Garm is derived from Garmur, who was the watchdog of Hell's Gate in Norse mythology. So it's sort of appropriate for this to be a first encounter, being the sort of watchdog for the Nether Realm. Garm's howling and breaking free of its fetters marks the advent of Ragnarok in Norse mythology, which, if you don't know, and I'm sure you do, is the Norse doomsday, basically. And during Ragnarok, he and Tyr are killed by one another. Tyr being a one-handed god of lore and violent glory. And those might seem like contradictory ideas to be the patron of, but I mean, this is the Nords that we're talking about. Obviously, Garma is associated with the Greek Kerberos, fills a similar role, but as you know, we'll be getting to Cobra soon enough, and we'll have plenty to talk about there. Two-headed dragon. This was a boss in Final Fantasy III's World of Darkness. It was guarding one of the Dark Crystals. There are references for it, like Hydra and Tiamat, or at least popular depictions of Tiamat. We'll talk more about that at the second boss coming up. Now, we've got Sacrifice Ninjas and Sacrifice Kunoichi. You all know what ninjas are. Kunoichi, I believe, I might be wrong here, someone correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it's literally just a female ninja. I don't think there's anything particularly distinct or special about them other than the gender. Now, we're coming up to Angra Mainyu, and this one's going to be a little bit esoteric. I actually have been thinking about this one a bit, because I've had to, because I mean, Eastern myth is something that I'm really interested in, but I've never been as strong on it as I have with the Western, the Greek and the Roman and the Norse stuff. But basically, the Angra Mainyu is the old Zoroastrian name for the Ahriman. So the way it's used here is basically as a synonym for the Ahriman. There might be some amateur Zoroastrian theologists listening that can explain this better, but I'm going to give it a go. Angra Mainyu literally means destructive spirit, and Zarathustra, that's the Greek name for Zoroastra. I'm more used to using that, so excuse me for that. So Zarathustra conceives of it as basically an antithesis to Ahura Mazda, which was the uncreated spirit and the source of all thought and truth, basically the genesis of mind and soul. Now, Angra Mainyu is sometimes, but not always, conflated with Aka Mainyu, I believe it is, or evil spirits. One explanation, as I understand it, is that Angra Mainyu inspired evil thinking in proto-human spirits, which would subsequently become Dewa, and collectively constitute the Aka Mainyu, rather. The Dewa basically being the equivalent of jinns or demons. Now, these Dewas reside in the netherworld, or hell, whatever you want to call it, and wait to claim the wicked dead. I think there's some debate whether this is or is not actually the realm of Angra Mainyu, and that I think it follows the same split which separates or conflates Angra Mainyu with Aka Mainyu. In either case, there's this natural dualistic balance between Angra Mainyu and Ahura Mazda. So for every land that Ahura Mazda creates, Angra Mainyu inevitably produces some kind of blight or scourge. That was that was greedy. That was some very greedy thrusting, and that was absolutely my fault. So anyway, like I say, for everything creative that Ahura Mazda produces, Angra Mainyu produces something destructive. So think of it kind of like Hydaelyn and Zodiac. It's the same sort of theme. Now, Zoroastrianism became quite fashionable in the 19th century in Europe, and the favored conception was that rather than this equivalent dualism, Angra Mainyu and Spenta Mainyu are the creative and destructive spirits born from Ahura Mazda. Sorry, that's my phone. And that all worship should be directed to this one supreme deity, which brought it in line with the European Enlightenment and appeased a lot of Christian missionaries that were hassling the shit out of the Indians, just incessantly hassling the Indians. So that settled them down a little bit once that became a more popular conception of Zoroastrianism. And it became the kind of trend, particularly in Germany, kind of like Buddhism was for middle-class white people in the 90s. That sort of really fashionable, oh god, this is going to kill me here. Now, that is not my fault. I take full responsibility for the first one, but that, I was fettered there. That was not my fault. Got 2 deaths on the first boss. Some people would start recording this over just because they knew they were going to cop shit for that one, but I can take that on the chin. Interesting thing about Zoroastrianism, most people, again with this contemporary idea that it is a monotheism rather than a pantheism. I'm pretty sure it's the oldest monotheism, the first monotheism and the longest surviving monotheism. There's still practitioners of it today. Actually, a friend of mine is a Zoroastrian, and she gets a lot of flack because it's kind of like Judaism in that you have to inherit it from a parent to be, you know, a proper practitioner in the eyes of the more conservative. But for Zoroastrianism, I think both of your parents have to be Zoroastrian, and there's only something like 1,000 of them left in the world. So she gets a lot of pressure from her parents, who are pushing her at like the 3 other eligible bachelors in the country who are also Zoroastrian, and she's not into it, and they're like 40 years old, and it's a little bit cruel, but you know, I don't want to speak too much on that. Scylla, I probably talked about Scylla in Crystal Tower, so I'll give you the short version for that. So Odysseus had to travel through a narrow channel between Italy and Sicily during the Odyssey, one side of which was the domain of Scylla. She was once a beautiful water nymph, but as a result of a love triangle between her, a sea god, I think it was Glaucus, and the sorceress Circe, namesake of my own little red potato, and Circe transformed her out of jealousy into a monster with 6 heads, each with 3 rows of teeth, a whole bunch of tentacles, 6 dog heads around her loins, and a cat tail. Obviously driven mad, she took to stalking the channel, attacking boats. She managed to eat 6 of Odysseus's men as they sailed past. Xande, we've probably talked about him as well, but Xande's clones appeared through the Crystal Tower in Final Fantasy III. Xande is a shortened form of the Greek Alexandros, meaning defender of men. Xande alludes to Alexander of Macedon, at least in my opinion, in this iteration, obviously as the king of a massive warring empire. Next pull. Excuse me, just taking a drink here. So we're coming up to, alright, 5-headed dragon. Now, this boss is basically a palette swap of Tiamat, as Tiamat appears in the Final Fantasy XIV concept art book. So some people have assumed that this is Tiamat and argued pretty heavily that this is Tiamat and some sort of stuff up by the localization team. I don't believe that. I don't think so. It's also the same model as Hydra. Obviously, they reuse a lot of models and assets with different reskins. So I'm expecting Tiamat to be one of the first brood of Midgard Soma that we have to fight in Heaven's Ward. So if this was supposed to be Tiamat, I think that they would have just called it Tiamat. That said, Tiamat is an interesting story, and one that's pretty relevant to us at the moment with Heaven's Ward coming up, so I think I may as well just talk about Tiamat. Tiamat was a pretty big deal in Dungeons & Dragons, from which the multi-headed dragon Visage originated. She was, I think, queen and mother of all of the evil dragons, and the sister of Bahamut, who is the king of the good dragons. She could take a human form as well as the 5-headed dragon gig, but each head was the color of a more common type of dragon, like we see in Final Fantasy with green and red dragons, etc. And each head had the corresponding powers of that dragon. So the blue would have ice powers, the red would have fire powers, the green would have poison powers. We see pretty much the same thing here. Tiamat, however, was originally not a dragon of any kind, let alone a 5-headed one. She was a primordial ocean goddess of the Mesopotamians. She was the mother of the gods, actually, and was the embodiment of both creation and chaos, and as an image was sort of the blending of fresh and saltwater oceans. It was not until much later that she was depicted as a dragon or a sea serpent, and like I say, never one with more than one head. That was all Gygax, conflating partly the image of Hydra, and I guess the idea of mixing of elements into one chaotic mess of a monster, but she's a really big deal in Final Fantasy, and a really interesting boss here. I like the idea of having DPS checks in these more casual raids, and I'm trying to think, I suppose Atmos in Labyrinth of the Ancients had a DPS check, and neither that nor this were much of a DPS check, but it's fun. Actually, all of the mechanics introduced in this patch, the bosses here, and in Keeper of the Lake, and in Amdapor Keep Hard, and Wondrous Palace Hard, I feel like it was a really big step up. Not so much in terms of difficulty, although I suppose this is definitely a step up in the difficulty of Crystal Tower, but more in terms of a fight design, having some interesting and varied mechanics. So while I got a little break in between thought trains here, I just want to remind everyone that I take requests on pretty much everything. If you've got a particular dungeon that you want to see for this series, if you've got a particular weapon that you want to see in the Armoire, and the Armoire, I don't know if I've stated this before, but it's not just relic weapons. I know that I'm doing the relic weapons also almost exclusively at the moment because I feel like they're going to be the most popular ones. But I'm planning on doing stuff on crafting tools, on Disciple of Hand tools, on pieces of armor, on other weapons. So if there's anything particularly you'd like to see from that, feel free to let me know. Same thing with the Umbral Zone. To be honest, if you can think of some vague or spooky half story that you've seen somewhere in in the course of Final Fantasy XIV that you think could be expanded upon with a little bit of dramatic effect, then, you know, let me know and I'll happily look at it. The other day, I had 3 requests in the space of about 12 hours of people coming off my 1.0 video, asking to, basically wanting to see me doing something to cover all of Coil, all of first Coil through to final Coil, and that's in the works now. I had people asking for it, so I'm doing it. I'm in the middle of writing a script that's gonna go right from the Allegan invasion of Meracidia all the way through to final Coil, and there's gonna be some spoilers there, and a lot of people are probably gonna want to hold off on watching that until they've cleared, or at least gotten to turn 12, but that'll be something that people can come back to as they're moving into Heaven's Ward, something that's always going to be there. It's something that, like the 1.0 video, I think it's going to be a really useful reference for a lot of people that want to come back and have some sort of, you know, easy and consumable way to get themselves up to speed. I definitely talked about Atomos at some length in Labyrinth of Ancients, but I'll repeat myself a little bit. Basically, it was a term coined by Democritus, who is an ancient Greek philosopher, for a theory that everything at a base level was made up of the same stuff. So basically, it was the grandfather of atomic theory, and that's where the term for atom came. I also think of it alluding in etymology to atmosphere, as Atomos is in every iteration representing a kind of breach in the membrane or atmosphere between the world and space, or nether, or void, or whatever you want to call it. So Atomos consumes you and you're cast into the void. But I guess seeing as we're already in the void here, he just spits us out. I guess he realizes his being here is kind of counterintuitive. If I were him, I'd frankly be a little embarrassed, feeling pretty useless. Now, Kerberos, we all know Kerberos. Very, very common in contemporary popular culture. It's the multi-headed hound and guardian of Hades. Stops anyone getting in or out. It's actually the offspring of Typhon. And Typhon in this game does absolutely no respect to its namesake whatsoever. Typhon in the Greek tradition was just horrible. He was the father of all monsters and the bane of the Olympians, defeating even Zeus in their first battle. He tore out Zeus's nerve endings or something. So the Hydra, Orthrus, who is a two-headed dog, and the Chimera are actually siblings of Kerberos, although Kerberos features far more heavily in both ancient and contemporary literature. The idea is that Typhon was literally the father of all of these horrible Greek monsters. So there are a number of heroes that sought access to Hades, had to pass by Kerberos. Orpheus was one. I think I've talked about Orpheus in another video, and okay, looks like we're going into the stomach now. Orpheus went to Hades to try and bring back his wife Eurydice, and he loved Kerberos to sleep with music. Now this, I'm going off on a tangent here, but I've always wanted to see an anima fight in this game. And the way that would have to be sort of split between two instances, you know, one being the overworld, one being the underworld. This here sets us a precedent. I know there are a lot of people saying that kind of thing would be really difficult to do and they weren't expecting to see anima, but I don't know, this to me is really promising, as disquieting an experience as first getting sucked in here is. I can definitely see an anima fight in the future, and was I talking about it in Oh, of course, I was talking about in the Umbral Zone with Edda and Avir. If you haven't seen that video, you should go check that out. That was a fun one. And I'm planning another installment of that series. To do with Hawk Manor, actually. Anyway, back to Kerberos. We've got Orpheus managed to get past him. Aeneas also managed to get past Kerberos by giving it a drugged honey cake. And was Heracles. Heracles' final of the 12 labors was to capture and tame Kerberos. So Heracles, he fought his way into the Stygian realm. He asked Hades if he could borrow his dog, and basically after beating it into submission with his bare fists, he slung it on his back and dragged it back to what's his name? Eurystheus, I think it is, the king. Anyway, Heracles doesn't fuck around. Although he's most often depicted with 3 heads, and the idea is either that one head sees the past, one sees the present, and one sees the future. Or in some representations, you've got one head represents youth, one represents middle age, one represents old age. Anyway, Kerberos, although we almost always see him with 3 heads, he was often represented with 2, with 50, even with 100 heads. So it's just one of those things where I guess early fantasy depictions have set a precedent which has been perpetuated for the sake of that spiritual through line over and over. As for the fetters, I feel like the fact that Kerberos is fettered here by the cloud of darkness implies to me that he's very much here against his will, and that rather than being sort of subservient to the cloud in a way that a lot of the Void Sent in here are, that maybe he was dragged in from somewhere else, and maybe that rather than being a lesser Void Sent of in comparison to the cloud of darkness, he's very much of the same degree and has just been enslaved and brought forth from his own little corner of the void, wherever that might be. Sorry, just taking another drink there. I think we're at about 25 minutes. And like I say, it's just not something that comes naturally to me to just talk for half an hour straight. You can probably already hear I'm losing my voice. But here we are, finally, Cloud of Darkness with one of my favorite themes from this patch. Soken's done a really, really good job here recently. So, the Cloud of Darkness is basically the spirit of nihilism in Final Fantasy III. She was much like the Ascians in 14, intending to return the universe to a state of static nothingness. She was manipulating the antagonist Xande in much the same way that the Ascians have manipulated various people to bring about umbral errors, and the way that Bahamut manipulated Nail Vandanis. Honestly, her origins are they're pretty vague. They're pretty much the same as those of Angra Mainyu. She just represents that sort of ancient and trans-cultural antithesis for life and creation. Unlike other Void Sent that seem to have their own agendas, she's more like the Ascians, like I say, just entirely focused on the cause of draining Hydaelyn and basically just pure and unadulterated evil. It's interesting that she also caused the earthquake in Final Fantasy III that almost drew the floating continent out of the sky. And it's very much parallel to the earthquake which was caused by the activation of the Crystal Tower, which was her design, I suppose, through Xande, which buried the Allegan civilization and brought about the 4th Umbral Era. This through line was already implying to us that the floating continent might be a feature of Heaven's Ward. I know it's something that a lot of people were hoping for. It seems pretty much certain now that the floating continent is an Allagan construction up there somewhere. We've seen a lot of screenshots and a bit of footage of this monstrous Allagan thing chained to rocks around it, floating in the middle of this this great big etheric anomaly is the only way I could think to describe it. So it's probably, no, I'm not going to say probably, I'm not going to commit to that. It's possibly the next 24-man raid, and whatever the next 24-man raid is, I'm pretty excited for it. It's going to be a while away. 3.1, I mean, that's probably not going to be until September or October at this rate, but you know what? We've been excited for Heavensward for a long time, and that hasn't died down at all, so I don't mind getting my hopes up. Actually, speaking of which, I was kind of surprised that we're getting 2.55 as early as we are. I was thinking, because it's such a small patch content-wise, it's just sort of wrapping up the main story, heading into Heavensward. I thought they were going to release it somewhere more like a month from Heavensward, so that they could keep that sort of hype train fueled, and you know, 3-month lull, it's not big, but it's enough that people are going to start to lose that sort of excitement and fervor they'll get from the 2.55 main scenario. But I guess the 3 months, what they're putting Final Coil on the Duty Finder, and they're taking off the restrictions, both for that and for World of Darkness. So I guess it's you know, in 3 months that everyone can get geared up to 130 with all their classes that they want to play, and you know, set some gil aside and basically prepare. I suppose that's something. Anyway, that's the Cloud of Darkness there. Sorry if that was a bit long-winded in places. These longer raids are they're a lot richer in content than the dungeons in terms of what I can do with Lore Tours, but they're also a lot longer, and you know, given I'm not working with a script and I'm just sort of winging it, I do often find that I'm at a loss for things to say every now and then, and like I say, I'm just super reluctant to do this. Every time someone asks me when's the next Lore Tour, I'm always kind of surprised. And yeah, I don't know. I'm just rambling now. I think you guys hear what I'm saying. Anyway, I've got a new armoire out for Stardust Rod. Check that out. I've gotten so many requests since doing my video on 1.0 that I'm doing one on Coil now. The whole sort of story of Bahamut from the third era right up to the final Coil. That's gonna have some spoilers, but there's something you want to come back and check out leading into Heavensward. But again, thanks so much for watching. Follow me on Twitter, like and sub if you're enjoying the series, all that stuff, and I'll see you next time.